Hello, my name is Sophia Gutierrez, and today I will be presenting on Wilhelm Wundt. Wilhelm Wundt is recognized as the founder of modern experimental psychology. In this presentation, I will discuss his background, his significant theoretical contributions, the culture and philosophical influences that shaped his work, systematic biases within early psychology and ethical implications, and the relevance of his ideas for contemporary psychological assessment and clinical practice. Wilhelm Wundt was born August 16, 1832, in Nickeroe, a small village near Heidelberg. His early childhood was characterized by isolation, poor health, and limited social connection. Accounts of his childhood describe him as being withdrawn, a child who would daydream, and who struggled academically and socially. His father suffered a massive stroke when he was 8. This event profoundly shaped his early environment. During this period, a young assistant named Friedrich Muller became his tutor, and this mentorship helped him to continue his studies. But despite the support, the early school years were still marked by academic failure. Teachers regarded him as inattentive and poorly suited for intellectual pursuits. His life changed when he moved into his aunt's home and shared a room with his older brother. The shift in environment, combined with him maturing, helped him make significant academic gains. It was all of these experiences, loneliness, introspection, difficulty connecting, and eventually his intellectual awakening, that likely contributed to his lifelong preoccupation with consciousness, inner self experience, and the scientific structure of mental life. Wundt initially pursued medicine, and he completed his degree in 1855 with the highest honors. Although he found little interest in medical practice, he discovered passion in physiology. He later became the assistant to Hermann von Helmholtz, who was one of the leading physiologists of the 19th century. It was this period that provided him with the scientific rigor and the grounding that would later shape experimental psychology. He became a renowned physiologist before he became a psychologist. He was working in a laboratory at the University of Leipzig. His investigations into physiological processes gradually drew his attention toward subjective mental experiences, which he believed shaped human perception. This shift in interest motivated him to examine psychological processes systematically, laying the groundwork for the emergence of psychology as its own scientific field. In 1873, he published Principles of Physiological Psychology. This was one of the earliest comprehensive texts in psychology. In his work, he argued that consciousness could be studied scientifically, and he introduced structured introspection as a method for examining its components. A pivotal moment was when the University of Leipzig recognized Wundt's laboratory as an independent, research-based space dedicated to psychological experimentation. It is known as the formal founding of scientific psychology in 1879. Although others, such as Weber, Fechner, and Helmholtz, developed the central methods and concepts, it was really Wundt who had the vision, persistence, and organizational skills needed to launch psychology as a new scientific discipline. The institution and his laboratory attracted students from all over the world and formally marked the beginning of experimental psychology as a separate scientific discipline. His laboratory became an international center of intellectual exchange, producing research, scholarly debate, and methodological innovations that transformed psychology from a branch of philosophy into an experimental science. Next, I will quickly review 6 major theoretical contributions. The first is the definition of psychology and the elements of consciousness. Wundt defined psychology as the science that investigates the facts of consciousness. He argued that psychology has 2 tasks: identify the basic elements of consciousness and understanding the laws that govern how these elements combine into complex mental processes, which he called psychic compounds. He distinguished between sensations, perceptions, and ideas, although he acknowledged that the line between perception and idea was not always clear. Sensations are the basic elements, whereas perceptions and ideas reflect combinations of these elements, influenced by memory, association, and context. 2. Association and apperception. One of his most important distinctions is between association, which is the passive linking of elements, and apperception, which involves active, directed, and meaningful mental organization. Apperception represents higher level cognitive processing, such as understanding the story rather than merely recalling its words. This concept anticipated modern cognitive psychology and is foundational to theories of attention, interpretation, and meaning making in clinical assessment. 3. Tridimensional theory of feeling. Wundt believed feelings are essential components of consciousness, and he developed a three-dimensional model involving, if you look at the screen here, involving pleasure and pain, excitation and quiescence, strain and relaxation. These dimensions combine to form complex emotions. This framework contributed to the development of affective science and to the study of emotional experience in clinical psychology. 4. Creative synthesis. Wundt emphasized complex mental events are not merely sums of their parts. In his principle of creative synthesis, he argued that combinations of elements yield new emergent properties. This anticipated contemporary perspectives on cognition, neuropsychology, and trauma integration, where new meaning structures emerge from the interaction of experience, memory, and emotion. Next, voluntarism. Voluntarism, the system Wundt preferred for his psychology, is not equivalent to free will. Instead, it emphasizes psychological causality, which is the idea that volitional acts are shaped by motives, ideas, and internal states. Wundt notes that voluntary actions are not always free. For example, individuals with severe mental illness may deliberate, yet still lack true reflective self-consciousness and therefore lack genuine freedom. This concept directly intersects with forensic psychology. Wundt's recognition that volition can exist without freedoms aligns with current discussions about criminal responsibility, the insanity defense, and the effects of mental illness on volitional control. And the sixth is Volcker psychology, also known as culture psychology. Wundt's broader vision extended far beyond the laboratory. In a massive 10-volume series, he explored anthropology, linguistics, religion, law, and culture, and he called it Volcker psychology. This work connected culture, language, and social institutions to human psychology. Although understudied today, it represents one of the earliest attempts to integrate culture into psychological science. Moving on. Moving on to cultural worldviews and systematic biases. Despite his broad intellectual contributions, he worked within the cultural and philosophical constraints of 19th century Germany. And so the earliest psychology reflected Western Eurocentric assumptions about universal mental processes. Experimental psychology relied heavily on introspection, using trained subjects, typically educated European men, which created systematic biases in those who were represented and whose experience counted as scientific. Additionally, the era's commitment to rationalism and empiricism prioritized measurement, sensory processes, and reaction times, while undervaluing culture, emotional, and spiritual dimensions of experience. And so Volcker psychology was an attempt to address these gaps. Ethical issues, both historical and contemporary, starting with historical. Historically, Wundt's laboratory operated before modern ethical standards existed. Students were often used as research subjects without informed consent as we understand it today. The limits of introspection also created methodological vulnerabilities, including concerns about accuracy, bias, and subjectivity. In contemporary practice, Wundt's ideas highlight ethical obligations in several ways. His emphasis on unconsciousness and subjective experience reminds clinicians to avoid reductionism. For example, reducing clients to scores or symptoms without deeper context. His volunteerism raises essential considerations for forensic evaluations, especially in assessing volitional capacity, intent, and responsibility. And additionally, his cultural psychology underscores the ethical importance of culturally informed consent and culturally informed assessment, one of the core competencies in today's clinical and forensic work. The impact on mental health and applied psychology. Wundt's most influential legacy may be his students. I'm just going to name one. Emil Kraepelin trained in Wundt's methods and developed early psychiatric classification systems, also advanced a theory of schizophrenia that was derived specifically from Wundt's psychology, and pioneered psychopharmacology. Many others carried his methods into the United States and Russia, shaping functionalism, behavioralism, and applied psychological science. Through his students and his methods, William Wundt provided the foundation for assessment, diagnosis, reaction time, research, neurological testing, and empirical approaches we still use today in clinical and forensic settings. Wundt's work directly supports modern psychological assessment, which is essential to my developing identity as a clinician and future psychologist. His emphasis on measurement resonates with evidence-based assessment, where precision, replication, and operational definitions remain fundamental. The distinction between association and apperception informs trauma-focused work, where clients make meaning out of fragmented experiences. Volunteerism provides conceptual grounding for forensic evaluations, especially in assessing volitional capacity and factors that impair reflective self-consciousness. His tridimensional theory of feelings parallels modern affective formulations, emphasizing that emotional states emerge from the interplay of multiple psychological dimensions. And finally, Wundt's cultural psychology reinforces the importance of culturally competent assessment, which is essential in clinical and ethical mandates in contemporary practice. In conclusion, William Wundt transformed psychology from philosophical speculation into an empirical science. Through his laboratory, theories, and students, he created the methodological and conceptual foundations for experimental, clinical, and forensic psychology. While early psychology reflected its cultural limitations, Wundt's broader vision anticipated many modern concerns, including culture, motivation, emotion, and the complexity of human consciousness. His work continues to influence how we measure, interpret, and understand human behavior in clinical and forensic contexts today.